Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. The first 2 weeks of the second Trump administration have produced quite a few headlines. We want to talk about as many of them as possible with someone who is in the arena in Washington. Senator Maggie Hassan joins us this morning on Close Up. Senator, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So there's a lot going on. There's a lot you're involved in. What is at the top of your list right now in terms of what has your attention?
Look, what is most concerning to me are the things that are impacting Granite Staters already on a day-to-day basis. So the illegal, unconstitutional freeze on already appropriated federal funds really is being felt in New Hampshire. I have visited with CAP agencies, those are community assistance programs, things like heating assistance, Head Start funding, all were slowed down or stopped temporarily, creating cash flow headaches, but more important, real uncertainty for the people and families who are depending on things like heating assistance when it's really, really cold in New Hampshire, people who need to go to work and they have a Head Start daycare center that they use, and all of a sudden that's up in the air for them. So that's, to me, the most significant thing in terms of what's impacting Granite Staters, along with the threat of tariffs against Canada, which is going to increase costs for Granite Staters all over the state, including with, again, home heating costs. But look, the bigger picture here is that the Trump administration has already started to do things that are clearly illegal or unconstitutional. They are ignoring the rules that we have that are so important for the transparent and effective operation of government. Elon Musk's involvement, especially his infiltration into critical data systems that have an extraordinary amount of personal data of pretty much every American, is concerning. The firing of the inspector generals in 17 agencies. These are the people who are independent of administrations. They work for both political party administrations, but their job is to root out fraud and abuse and stop corruption. And in fact, they are quite effective at it. And Donald Trump immediately fired them. And he did that, by the way, illegally, because there's a process that needs to be followed. Those are some of the things I have my eye on, in addition, of course, to working to assess the nominees for cabinet positions that they're bringing forward.
Are there any indicators that the access that Elon Musk's team gained at the Treasury Department may have crossed legal lines?
Well, that's one of the things we are trying to find out, and there have been some court hearings on what happened at the Treasury Department. Some temporary orders by some federal courts have told the Treasury Department and Elon Musk that he has limited access now and can have kind of read-only access. But let's be clear, Elon Musk brought with him people with computer skills, coding skills. We don't know what they did in their first hours and days of access here. And again, this should trouble every American.
If there's something that needs to be investigated, who's going to investigate it?
Well, usually you would start with inspectors general. And of course, this is why the illegal firing of these inspectors general is so concerning to so many of us. Look, Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, also has a lot of federal contracts. And so the conflicts of interest here are extraordinary. If there is a competitor who's also bidding for a contract, what's he going to use this data for, right? So this is all really concerning. It's why you see different courts around the country halting some of these actions. But at the end of the day, my job in the Senate is to communicate as well as I can about my concerns. And let's also be clear, I thought we were going to get to work right away on legislation that could actually lower costs for Granite Staters. And the President and the Republicans in the Senate and the House have yet to come forward with a single piece of legislation or a single proposal that will lower people's costs.
One more on Mr. Musk. Mr. Musk says that he is trying to root out fraud, waste, and abuse, and that anyone who's trying to stop him is protecting that fraud.
Look, that is a very convenient excuse, but Mr. Musk has a financial interest in what he is doing. He doesn't know much about government. If he did, and if he really wanted to root out fraud, waste, and abuse, he would keep the inspector generals on hand and be working with them. You know, one of the things that inspector generals do, for for instance, they will look at the payment records of an agency and say, hey, you know, the federal government just overpaid this contractor. There are some very large corporations in America who get overpaid, and it is our inspector generals who claw back that money, who also bring to us proposals to make government more efficient. Then it's up to Congress to pass some of those proposals, something I've worked on in a bipartisan way to do.
What would be the impact, as you see it, of so greatly reducing the international footprint of the USAID?
Look, I hope Granite Staters understand how important USAID is and what a small investment it is for a big return. Our foreign aid budget generally is about 1% of the overall federal budget, and it is critical to investing in communities to help them stabilize, to help them become self-sufficient. That not only makes us friends, and it's always good to have friends around the world, but it actually is really important for our national security, because in some instances we can either send troops, or for much less money, we can help people learn and build businesses in self-sufficiency and develop strong relationships and minimize the possibility of war and terrorism.
In terms of money that has been appropriated by Congress that is now being withheld by the executive, do you define this as a constitutional crisis?
I define this as illegal and a violation of the Constitution. Article 1 of the Constitution is really clear. It is Congress that authorizes programs and appropriates money. And in this case, I want people to understand that Donald Trump and his administration are freezing funds that were appropriated by Congress, bipartisan, often appropriations, right, and signed into law by the last president of the United States. That is binding, and it's important for the rule of law and to uphold the Constitution, but it's also really important for the stability of our economy and our way of life. And so the illegal part of this, in addition to being unconstitutional, is that there is something called the Impoundment Control Act, passed in the 1970s, which says this is something the president can't do, and the Supreme Court upheld it as constitutional back in the mid-1970s. The new head of the budget office at the White House, who just got confirmed over my objection and that of, I think, every Democrat, is the problem with him is that he believes, even though the Supreme Court has said that is a constitutional law, he can ignore it, and he's told us that, and that's why one of the reasons I voted against him.
As we wrap up here, you know, your questioning of Robert F. Kennedy, a viral moment, some might call it these days. We don't often get to see that side of Senator Hassan. What was it about that moment that really sort of kindled the fire for you and let it out?
Look, I did not plan to go into that hearing to talk about my family or my personal experience, but Mr. Kennedy is such a divisive person and was such a divisive nominee that he actually had Republicans in the hearing questioning whether Democrats wanted to know what the cause of autism is. And of course, we all know people with autism. This is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. And I found myself sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, this is where we've come? And the whole reason Kennedy's conspiracy theories on vaccines and so many other things are so dangerous is they exploit the feelings of worry and concern that are natural for every parent to have. In my case, with a child who has disabilities, the concern that maybe something I did during my pregnancy caused it. That's a concern that he plays on, and it freezes us into relitigating settled science. I want to be really clear. Only one tiny study ever suggested there was a connection between vaccines and autism. It was retracted after 7 much larger studies from every continent on Earth made it clear that it was not true, and it was retracted by the journal. We actually have research going on that is getting us closer to understanding the cause of autism so we could prevent it and treat it and help families and help individuals. And yet, Mr. Kennedy keeps insisting that we go backwards. That really concerned me. The divisiveness around something that should be something we can all work on together really concerned me. And I just felt it was really important to let him know how troubled I was, and let my colleagues know how troubled I was by this nominee.
In terms of oversight of Mr. Kennedy at HHS, what is one issue that you're really going to be paying attention to?
Look, I'm going to be paying attention to where he goes on NIH funding, National Institute of Health. People should should know a lot of the basic research for cures that we get comes out of NIH. Patients all from around the country get cutting-edge treatment at NIH. But I am also really concerned about making sure that we continue to have a robust vaccine program. We should be proud of the fact that we've eradicated just deadly diseases for our kids. But the other thing is, Donald Trump and Elon Musk and the Republicans have said they will cut Medicaid by significant amounts of money. It's not, we want to cure disease, to be sure, but there are people with illness and disability who need care, and Medicaid is what covers most of our seniors in their nursing homes. So Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are suggesting they will push seniors out of nursing homes. They will reduce the amount of home care available for kids and adults with disabilities. And they're suggesting that they'll do away with Medicaid expansion, which provides addiction treatment and mental health treatment. So on lots of levels, I'm very concerned. He didn't really know anything about the Medicaid or Medicare programs. That's another reason I'm concerned. But mostly I'm concerned that he does not seem to be willing to accept science. He uses conspiracy theories in a very cynical way, and I think he lacks the character or judgment to lead one of the country's most impactful, most important, and largest agencies.
All right, Senator Maggie Hassan, thank you so much for joining us on Close Up.
Thank you
we appreciate
very
the
much.
time.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back with New Hampshire's child advocate, Cassandra Sanchez.